They learned early that survival wasn't about strength, it was about bending without breaking. In the long shadow of the Mughal Empire, where emperors built marble dreams and armies marched across dust-heavy plains, ordinary families lived on a knife's edge. One failed harvest, one new tax, one passing army, and everything could collapse overnight. No warning, no mercy. A mother would stretch a handful of grain into a meal that had to last 3 days. A father would smile in the evening, hiding the quiet terror of empty fields. Children learned quickly, not from books, but from hunger, from silence, from the way adults stopped speaking when things got bad. This wasn't the world of palaces and jewels people like to remember. This was the other side, the real side. And still, they endured. Not with grand rebellions or heroic speeches, but with small, stubborn acts of survival. A hidden sack of millet, a whispered deal in a crowded market, a journey taken at night when staying meant certain ruin. Their lives didn't make it into royal chronicles, but without them, the empire itself would have crumbled. This is their story, quiet, fragile, and unbreakable in ways no one wrote down.
The empire stretched wide, across fertile plains, tangled forests, and dry lands that cracked under the sun. Under rulers like Akbar, Jahangir, and later Aurangzeb, it appeared powerful, almost unshakable. Cities grew, trade flowed, and courts glittered with wealth. But that stability, what people call the Golden Age, it didn't feel golden to everyone. For most families, life was a constant negotiation with uncertainty. They lived in villages made of mud walls and thatched roofs, the kind of homes that could vanish in a storm. A single room sometimes held 5, 6, even 10 people. Privacy didn't exist. Comfort wasn't expected. Survival came first. The rhythm of life followed the land. Plant, wait, hope, harvest, and pray nothing went wrong in between, because something always did. Monsoon rains, when they came on time, were a blessing, but when they didn't, the earth hardened like stone. Crops failed quietly at first, leaves curled, soil lost its color. Then hunger crept in, slow and patient. It didn't shout, it lingered. And when famine struck, it didn't just take food, it took dignity. Families sold whatever they could, tools, jewelry, even livestock, their last line of security. There are accounts, fragmented, imperfect, but real, of people boiling leaves, grinding bark, stretching anything into something edible. Not because it worked, but because doing nothing felt worse. Children, they noticed everything. The smaller portions, the tired eyes, the way parents pretended to eat. And still, people adapted. Some villages developed quiet systems of sharing. Not charity, no one could afford that, but something close to it. Grain was lent, not given. Debts were remembered. Favors carried weight. It wasn't kindness in the modern sense, it was survival logic. Today for you, tomorrow for me. Then there were taxes. The Mughal system relied heavily on land revenue. Officials, some fair, some ruthless, came to collect what was owed. In good years, it was manageable. In bad years, it was devastating. Imagine standing in a field that barely produced enough to feed your family and still being asked to give a portion of it away. Some complied. They had no choice. Others resisted quietly, underreporting harvests, hiding grain, negotiating through intermediaries. It wasn't rebellion, it was calculation. Open defiance meant punishment, sometimes violent. So they learned to bend the rules without breaking them entirely. It was a dangerous balance. And then there were the armies.
Mughal power depended on movement. Troops marching across regions, enforcing authority, expanding borders, putting down rebellions. When armies passed through, villages held their breath. Soldiers needed food, supplies, shelter, and they took them. Sometimes it was organized, controlled. Other times it wasn't. For families, it meant sudden loss. Crops trampled, storage emptied, livestock taken. The kind of disruption that didn't just hurt in the moment, it echoed for months, sometimes years. So people adjusted. They hid things. Food wasn't always stored in obvious places. Clay pots buried underground, grain sealed in walls, small caches scattered just in case. Women often led these efforts, quietly managing what little remained, deciding what could be used now and what had to be saved for later. They became experts in stretching resources, in knowing exactly how long something would last, in reading the signs of coming trouble before it arrived. Men, meanwhile, faced another kind of pressure. When farming failed, or when taxes became unbearable, many left. Seasonal migration wasn't unusual. Men travelled to towns, cities, construction sites, anywhere work could be found. Building roads, forts, palaces, the same structures that symbolized imperial power were often built by hands that had fled hunger. It was a trade-off. They sent money or grain back home when they could. Sometimes they returned. Sometimes they didn't. And the families left behind, they adapted again. Women took on more responsibilities, managing land, negotiating with officials, protecting what remained. Their roles weren't always recorded in official histories, but without them, survival would have been impossible. There's something deeply human in that, how roles shift under pressure, how people step into spaces they were never meant to occupy. Markets became lifelines. Weekly bazaars weren't just places of trade, they were centers of information. News traveled faster than any official message. Rumors, warnings, opportunities, everything passed through these crowded spaces. A trader might mention rising prices in a nearby town. A traveller could speak of unrest or a failed harvest elsewhere. Families listened carefully. Information meant survival. It meant knowing when to sell, when to hold, when to leave. Barter was common. Money existed, yes, but it wasn't always available. So goods moved in exchange for goods, grain for cloth, labour for food. Small transactions that kept life moving, even when systems above them faltered. And above all, there was community. Not perfect, not always fair, but necessary. Villages had internal structures, elders, informal leaders, people whose voices carried weight. Disputes were settled locally when possible. Cooperation wasn't optional. It was essential, because isolation, that was the real danger. A family alone, without support, had fewer options, less protection, fewer chances to recover from loss. So they stayed connected,
even when tensions ran high, even when resources were scarce. Religion and belief played a quiet but powerful role, not in grand displays, but in daily rituals, small prayers, offerings, moments of hope in uncertain times. Faith didn't remove hardship, but it gave it meaning. It provided structure when everything else felt unstable. Festivals, when they could be celebrated, brought brief relief. A break from routine, a reminder that life wasn't only struggle. Even in difficult years, people tried to mark these moments, not extravagantly, but intentionally, because joy, however small, mattered. But not everything could be managed. There were times when families made the hardest decision of all, leaving everything behind. Migration wasn't just economic, it was emotional. It meant abandoning land tied to memory, to identity, to generations before them. Some moved to growing urban centres, places like Delhi, Agra, Lahore. Cities offered opportunity, but also risk. Overcrowding, competition, uncertainty of a different kind. Still, for many, it was the only option left. And they rebuilt, not from scratch, but from fragments. A new routine, a new network, a new version of survival. Children grew up in these shifting environments. Their understanding of stability was different. Home wasn't always a place, it was a condition. A moment when things felt safe, even briefly. And over time, they learned the same lessons as their parents. Adapt, adjust, endure. What stands out when looking back at this period isn't just the scale of hardship, it's the consistency of resilience. These families didn't have control over empires, policies, or weather, but they controlled what they could, decisions made day by day, often under pressure, often without certainty. They weren't passive victims. They were active participants in their own survival. Histories tend to focus on rulers, on battles, policies, monuments, and those matter. But they don't tell the whole story, because an empire isn't sustained by its rulers alone. It depends on the millions who live within it, who farm its land, trade its goods, build its structures, raise its children. And when those people find ways to survive, even under strain, the system continues. That's the quiet truth behind the Mughal Empire's longevity. Not just power from the top, but endurance from below. Of course, not everyone made it. There were losses. Entire communities affected by famine, disease, conflict. Stories that ended abruptly, leaving little trace. And that matters too, because survival wasn't guaranteed. It was earned, often at a cost. What remains, then, is a kind of echo, not in grand records, but in patterns, in the ways communities adapted, in the strategies passed down, sometimes without words, the habit of saving a little extra just in case, the instinct to share information quietly, the understanding that stability can disappear and that preparation matters. These aren't just historical details. They're human responses to uncertainty, and they feel familiar, even now, because in different ways, across time and place, people still face versions of the same challenge: how to hold things together when everything feels like it might fall apart. The families of Mughal India didn't solve that problem once and for all. They lived through it, again and again. and in doing so, they left behind something subtle but powerful, a record of resilience not written in ink, but in action, quiet, persistent, unseen, but never insignificant.